Carlos sat in the chair. It was a hard, uncomfortable chair. Across the table, the hiring manager, Mrs. Vance, was staring at him. She didn't smile. She just tapped her finger on his resume. Tap. 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 The interview had been going well. Carlos had answered the easy questions perfectly. He told her his name. He told her about his university degree. He felt confident. But then, Mrs. Vance took off her glasses. She leaned forward. Her eyes narrowed. Carlos, she said, her voice serious. Your resume is good. But I need to know something else. Tell me about a time you had a serious conflict with a boss. And tell me, whose fault was it? The room went silent. Carlos's throat went dry. He knew he couldn't lie. But if he told the truth, would he lose the job? But before we find out how Carlos answers the impossible question. Hello, future professionals. Welcome back to the channel. I am your teacher and your guide. In this episode, you will learn English by listening to the story of Carlos, a young graphic designer, who has to survive the most stressful 30 minutes of his life, a job interview. We are going to learn how to handle difficult questions, how to talk about your past mistakes, and how to turn a negative situation into a positive one. To help you understand the story, we are going to focus on 3 specific power words that you will hear today: constructive, resolved, and scenario. Take a deep breath, fix your tie, and let's enter the interview room. Carlos stood outside the glass doors of Apex Design. It was the biggest marketing company in the city. He smoothed down his blue suit. It was a little tight, but it made him feel professional. He had practiced for this interview for 3 days. He stood in front of his mirror at home, answering standard questions. My name is Carlos. I am hardworking. I am creative. He felt ready. He walked into the lobby. The air conditioning was cold. It smelled like expensive coffee and success. Let me set the scene. The office was modern. It had glass walls everywhere. You could see people typing on computers and drinking water. It looked transparent, but Carlos felt like everyone was watching him. A receptionist with a bright smile led him to a small room. Mrs. Vance will be with you shortly, she said. Shortly is a great business word. It means soon or in a short time. It sounds much more professional than saying in a minute. Carlos sat down. He put his portfolio on the table. A portfolio is a collection of your best work. For an artist or designer, it is more important than a resume. Suddenly, the door opened. Mrs. Vance walked in. She was a tall woman with gray hair and a sharp suit. She didn't look mean, but she looked very serious. She looked like a person who didn't like to waste time. Good morning, Carlos, she said. Let's begin. The first 10 minutes were easy. Mrs. Vance asked about his education. Carlos spoke clearly. He didn't rush. He remembered to breathe. I see you worked at a small print shop last year, Mrs. Vance said. Did you enjoy it? Yes, Carlos said. It was a fast-paced environment. I learned a lot about deadlines. Mrs. Vance nodded. She wrote something down in her notebook. Carlos tried to see what she was writing, but he couldn't. Then, the atmosphere changed. Mrs. Vance stopped writing. She looked at Carlos. Carlos, she said. This is a high-pressure job. Sometimes, we disagree with each other. I want you to describe a specific scenario where you disagreed with a supervisor. How did you handle it? Carlos froze. This was the behavioral question. Behavioral questions don't ask about your skills. They ask about your personality. They want to know how you react to stress. Carlos's mind started to race. He thought about his old boss, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson was a nightmare. He used to yell. He used to change his mind every 5 minutes. Carlos remembered one specific day. The brochure incident. Mr. Henderson had told Carlos to print 500 brochures in blue. Carlos did it. Then, Mr. Henderson screamed at him, saying he wanted them in red. Carlos wanted to say to Mrs. Vance, "My old boss was crazy and I hated him." But he knew he couldn't say that. In an interview, you must never insult your previous employer. It makes you look difficult. Let me explain that again. To insult means to say something rude or bad about someone. If Carlos insulted his old boss, Mrs. Vance would think Carlos was the problem. Carlos took a sip of water. He needed time to think. He needed to be honest, but he also needed to be constructive. He decided to tell the story of the brochures, but he needed to change the focus. He shouldn't focus on the anger. He should focus on the solution. "Well," Carlos began, his voice shaking just a little. "At my last job, there was a miscommunication about a printing order. My manager thought he ordered red ink, but the email said blue ink. When the blue brochures arrived, he was very upset." Mrs. Vance raised an eyebrow. "And what did you do? Did you argue with him? Did you show him the email to prove he was wrong?" This was the trap. If Carlos said, "Yes, I proved I was right," he would look arrogant. If he said, "I just apologized," he would look weak. He needed to show he was a problem solver. Carlos is in a dangerous spot. Before we hear his answer, let's press pause and look at those 3 power words that can save him. Word number 1, constructive. This means serving a useful purpose. It is positive and helpful. We often talk about constructive criticism. This means giving feedback to help someone improve, not just to hurt their feelings. Example: the manager gave me constructive feedback on my project, so I knew how to fix it. Word number 2, resolved. This is the past tense of resolve. It means to find a solution to a problem or a dispute. In an interview, you always want to show how you resolved a conflict. Example: we sat down, talked about the issue, and resolved the argument quickly. Word number 3, scenario. A scenario is a situation that could happen, or a description of a situation. Interviewers love this word. They will ask, "What would you do in this scenario?" Example: in the scenario where a client is angry, you must remain calm. Okay. Carlos needs to show he was constructive, that he resolved the problem, and he needs to explain the scenario clearly. Let's go back to the hot seat. Carlos looked Mrs. Vance in the eye. "No," Carlos said firmly. "I didn't argue. I realized that proving I was right wouldn't fix the brochures. The client was coming in 1 hour. We needed a solution, not an argument." Mrs. Vance leaned back in her chair. She looked interested. "So," Carlos continued, "I remained calm. I told my boss, I understand you are frustrated. Let's look at the schedule." I called the printing team immediately. I asked them to stop all other jobs and reprint the brochures in red. I helped them load the paper myself to save time. Carlos took a deep breath. We finished the red brochures 5 minutes before the client arrived. My boss was relieved. Later, when things were calm, I showed him the original email. I didn't do it to be mean. I did it to suggest a new system, so the mistake wouldn't happen again. We created a sign-off sheet for every order. Carlos smiled. So, the conflict was actually useful. It helped us improve our process. Mrs. Vance stared at him. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick. Tock. Then, Mrs. Vance smiled. That, she said, is a very mature answer. You focused on the business, not on your ego. The rest of the interview was easy. They talked about design software. They talked about colors. They even joked about the coffee in the lobby. When Carlos stood up to leave, Mrs. Vance shook his hand. Her grip was strong. Thank you, Carlos, she said. We have a few more people to interview, but I am very impressed with how you resolved that issue. Carlos walked out of the glass building. He loosened his tie. He took a deep breath of the city air. He realized something important. The interviewer didn't want a robot. She didn't want someone perfect, who never made mistakes. She wanted a human being. She wanted someone who could handle pressure without exploding. He checked his phone. He didn't have the job yet. But as he walked to the subway station, he knew he had done his best. He had turned his worst memory, the angry boss, into his greatest strength. Carlos learned that in an interview, the story is more important than the facts. Facts are on your resume. But your stories tell them who you are. The moral of the story is this: don't be afraid of your past mistakes. Use them to show how much you have grown. Now, I have a challenge for you. I want you to practice being brave. What is your biggest weakness? Is it public speaking? Is it being too disorganized? Is it chocolate? Tell me in the comments below, but try to make it constructive. Tell me how you are working to fix it. If you want to feel confident in your next interview and speak English like a professional, please click subscribe and listen to this episode next. We are going to explore business email etiquette, how to write without being rude. Thank you for listening. Be constructive, stay calm, and I'll see you in the next story.